Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Corporal James Manning. We are honoured to welcome Warrant Officer Class 1, Glenn Horton, Army Sergeant Major, United Kingdom High Commission. Warrant Officer Class 1, Donald Spinks, Regimental Sergeant Major, Australia, the accompanying delegation, and the delegation representing France. We also welcome representatives from the Army, Navy, and Air Force historical units. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony around Australia. Today, we mark the centenary of the establishment of the Australian War Records Section. From its humble origins, the War Records Section grew to become the precursor of our national commemorative icon, the Australian War Memorial, where we are gathered today. The Australian War Records Section was established in France 100 years ago today, on the 16th of May 1917, in the midst of the First World War. Lieutenant John Treloar was appointed with a small team of soldiers to undertake the collection and preservation of war records and relics for a proposed Australian War Museum and Memorial in Canberra. The collection was intended to provide an understanding of the experiences of Australian servicemen and women in war. The section also managed the work of official war artists and official war photographers. In 1919, after the war ended, the War Records Section shipped home to Australia more than 25,000 war relics and items, ranging from large artillery pieces to personal items of uniform and kit. These were to become the core collection of the Australian War Museum, as it was known when it first opened to the public in the exhibition building in Melbourne on Anzac Day 1922. The museum moved to the Sydney Exhibition Building in 1925, where it was viewed by more than 2.5 million visitors over the following decade. From there, it moved to Canberra to be installed in the present Australian War Memorial, which opened more than 75 years ago on the 11th of November 1941. The inception of the memorial through the establishing of the Australian War Records Section in May 1917 is commemorated on the inauguration stone located in the Captain Reg Saunders courtyard on the western side of the building. The memorial's daily last post ceremony honours the service and sacrifice of one individual, of more than 102,000 Australians whose names were recorded on the memorial's Roll of Honour, in recognition of all those who have died in war or on operational service. This evening's ceremony will commemorate the service and sacrifice of Corporal Ernest Lionel Bailey, who was accidentally killed in France on the 17th of May 1918, while on active duty with the Australian War Records Section. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools: from New South Wales, Clarence Town Public School, and from Western Australia, John the 23rd College Secondary Department, Mount Claremont, and John Wollaston Community School, Primary Department, Kelmscott. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australian
Boys and girls, please sit. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Ernest Lionel Bailey. Ernest Bailey was born in Sydenham, London around 1886. He attended St Michael's School in Sydenham and at the age of 23 immigrated to Australia, eventually making his way to the goldfields of Western Australia, where he worked as a gold assayer. He lived for some time in Macarthur, where he became popular. Locals later remembered him as an Australian by adoption, a prince of good fellows, and his fine qualities made a deep impression upon those associated with him. Bailey enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in August 1915 and underwent a period of training before leaving Australia with reinforcements to the 28th Battalion in November. He was first sent to Egypt, arriving with a bad case of influenza and going straight to hospital. At this time, the Australian units recently evacuated from Gallipoli were undergoing a period of training and expansion. As part of this process, Bailey was transferred through several battalions, eventually being sent to Egypt with the 13th Training Battalion in June 1916. After 3 months in England, Bailey was posted to the 51st Battalion and sent to France. He spent the bitterly cold winter of 1916 and 1917 rotating in and out of the front line. In January 1917, he was transferred to the 1st Anzac Corps Salvage Section and shortly afterwards took a short period of leave in England. Bailey continued with the Salvage Section and returned to England in August 1917 to marry Emily Klein in a civil ceremony on the 28th of August 1917. In September, Bailey was promoted to Lance Corporal and detached for duty to the Australian War Records Section. The War Records Section had been created in May 1917 for the purpose of acquiring objects and war relics, paper records, photographs, film and art in order to preserve a record of the Australian experiences in the war. The resulting collection laid the foundation for the Australian War Memorial's massive collection today. Bailey lived at the museum depot in Vignecourt and was an enthusiastic member of the small team, going out among units to collect items and prepare them for storage. He earned another promotion, this time to corporal, in the following year. On the 17th of May 1918, Bailey was working on some German trench mortar bombs, removing some traces of high explosives with a chisel, as was common practice. At about 2:30 in the afternoon, there was an explosion. When others from the depot rushed over, they found one of the German mortar bombs had detonated and killed Bailey instantly. The Australian official historian Charles Bean arrived on the scene soon afterwards. He wrote this about Bailey. He was a splendid man, keen and intensely trustworthy. More than any man I know, he was responsible for the founding of this Australian War Museum with such a splendid series of exhibits. He will not be replaced. They will not get another man like him. The thought of his cheery smile as he came on the coldest of days of the winter makes one sick at heart for the loss of him. Bean paid Ernest Bailey a magnificent tribute, writing that the great Australian War Museum, when it finally stands in the Australian capital, will be a monument to him, for it is his work that thousands upon thousands of Australians will see as they walk down those galleries. Corporal Ernest Lionel Bailey was buried in the nearby Vignecourt British Cemetery, where he lies under the epitaph chosen by his wife: "To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die." He was 32 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Ernest Lionel Bailey, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and good evening.